And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli. I'm Chip Patterson. The new college football playoff rankings are out. And oh man, Tom, there are so many changes. And none of them are at the top where it matters, where we pick our playoff teams. 1, Georgia. 2, Alabama. 3, Oregon. 4, Ohio State. 5, Cincinnati. 6, Michigan. I did target that as potential drama. Michigan State checks in at number 7. We do have Notre Dame making a move up at number 8, Oklahoma State at 9, and then the Wake Forest Demon Deacons at number 10 as well. Just listen, I feel like we've been through a little bit of a listless draw against Jamaica for the U.S. men's national team, a dramaless college football playoff top 25 rankings release. I've got some thoughts a little bit further down the rankings, but that won't ultimately determine the national championship. Do you want to take this from the back forward or the top down?
I mean, they're really kind of dealing a blow to our CFP and on kind of shtick here because like last week, it was like, did they switch Michigan and Michigan State just to give us something to talk about? And now there's like, what can we argue about here?
There's not much to argue about, but I do think that there's a list of takeaways. You want me to just start like firing off some thoughts?
Sure. And I'll tell you, they're all wrong.
All right. Number 1, they love NC State because Wake Forest has moved up to number 10 after defeating NC State, and NC State, after taking its 3rd loss of the season, is now sitting still within the top 25 right there at number, where are we at?
20. But 20. Did they pump Wake Forest up because they like NC State or just because Oklahoma lost? Because that's what it is to me. Like Oklahoma lost, fell from 8 to 13, and then everybody else moved up a spot.
Okay, I thought there were some interesting. I would have put Ole Miss ahead of Wake Forest. I would have entertained Baylor ahead of Wake Forest. I think that Ole Miss with Texas A&M, Arkansas, Tennessee, strength of schedule of 13. I think that Baylor with the win over Oklahoma, granted, like BYU is its next best win, but still Oklahoma and BYU, Texas A&M and Arkansas. I think that Baylor and Ole Miss, and look, I say this with much love for Dave Clawson and much love for the Wake Forest program, but in the process of trying to study the committee rankings, Wake Forest was a bit higher than I expected. I thought that Oklahoma against Wake Forest was a debate where Wake Forest would win that one, not that it would also be ahead of Baylor and Ole Miss.
I get that, but I'm not surprised because, I mean, Baylor and Ole Miss both have 2 losses. So I think that they're going to put the 1-loss Power 5 title champion right now, highest ranked team in the ACC, ahead of Baylor, the 2-loss Baylor and the 2-loss Ole Miss, especially because Baylor's losses have both come to teams that aren't ranked right now. And then Ole Miss is, so I'm not that surprised by it. I'm kind of surprised by how much they really dislike Oklahoma.
Or the Big 12 in general. I mean, Coco was talking about that as we were watching live together with you know what? That would have been an awful podcast listen. Maybe a good video watch if you just seen us be outraged as nothing is really happening and there is no drama. But if you are listening to the Cover 3 podcast, as many listeners do, hoping for something, the long pauses and sighs don't make for good audio. But the conclusion that I have is that the Big 12 is getting disrespected by the committee.
They are, but it's also one of those things where I don't think if I'm an Oklahoma State fan or an Oklahoma fan, I'm too concerned about it because it's still pretty much the same formula. Like they obviously don't really respect their resumes to this point, but if Oklahoma State wins out, it's got to be in the playoff. I don't see it getting left out because Ohio State or Michigan State are going to knock each other out. One of them's going down this week. And then you've got Michigan and Ohio State the week after that. So one of those, if Ohio State beats Michigan State, then it's going to be, one of Ohio State or Michigan getting knocked out the week after that. Oregon's probably going to have to play Utah twice. There's Notre Dame to worry about, but I do think if Oklahoma State wins out, which will include at least one more win over Oklahoma and then maybe another win over Oklahoma in the title game, or maybe even Baylor, that's going to give them a resume to surpass an 11-1 Notre Dame team whose best win at that point would be like, what? Purdue?
The best win for Notre Dame?
Yeah.
Is Wisconsin.
Oh, Wisconsin. That's right. That game was so long ago.
I know, but
That was a completely different Wisconsin team too.
it was also a different Notre Dame team, and as we discussed, we actually think Notre Dame's better
Yeah.
now than like the quality of the team, the form that they're in right now, much better at this point in the season than when they beat Wisconsin. But thanks to Wisconsin's late season surge, with Wisconsin playing the best football of its season right now, then goodness gracious, I guess that ends up being what they hang their hat on. But Notre Dame at 8, you wrote about it this week on CBSSports.com. We talked about it here on the Cover 3 podcast. Notre Dame is the college football playoff contender that is a legitimate contender that everybody seems to have forgotten about.
Mm-hmm. And it's going to be hilarious when 11-1 Notre Dame gets chosen over 13-0 Cincinnati.
We got some time before we get to that. All right. Do you feel confident? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, you want to talk about, how surprised are you that Michigan wasn't ranked ahead of Cincinnati?
Minorly surprised. I was grasping at straws looking for debates there. What did I say? It was Notre Dame against Oklahoma State and Michigan against Cincinnati were the only spots where I thought it was really difficult. Edge Notre Dame in the Notre Dame versus Oklahoma State. Notre Dame at 8, Oklahoma State at 9. Edge Cincinnati in the Cincinnati-Michigan debate. Cincinnati at 5, Michigan at 6. Again, the same as last week. So, I was just trying to target where things would be difficult on the committee. Like as much as I'm trying to learn about the process, those seemed like particularly interesting debates. If you are watching right now on YouTube, youtube.com/cover3, chime in on the chat. Let us know what you think. Already saw some comments about Mississippi State. Mississippi State checking in at number 25. I believe the only 4-loss team inside the top 25 ranking from the selection committee. I'll say it. I think that's okay.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I get it. I understand why they've ranked Mississippi State because it's 6-4, yes, but the 4 losses have been there's one. Well, actually, no, screw it. I don't understand it. You know why? Because the 4 losses have been to Memphis, LSU, and Arkansas,
and Alabama.
But that's the one loss where it's like, okay, and I understand they have a couple wins, but you're still valuing their win over Kentucky, who you're no longer ranking. You're still valuing their win over Auburn, who you're no longer ranking. So what is the resume? I mean, Texas A&M, who you just knocked down to 15. Okay, so that's now your best win that you're looking at for their resume. I don't really think that should overcome a 6-4 team.
The 4 losses is damning, and LSU and Memphis are damning losses. And those, like in many people's opinion, should be an anchor. However, what I think happened here with the selection committee, and just to compare it to some of its neighbors, Texas A&M, Auburn, Texas A&M and NC State, Auburn no longer in the college football playoff top 25. So that's 2 wins against teams within the current top 25. Houston at 24 has 0 wins against teams in the current top 25. Utah at number 23 has 0 wins against teams in the top 25. Let's go up to 22. UTSA, 0 wins against teams in the top 25. 21, Arkansas. Mississippi State is one of them, but 2. So I think that, and I mentioned this on the podcast before, but Mississippi State is the most interesting resume in an insignificant spot for the actual competition for the national championship. I am fascinated by how the committee ranks Mississippi State, and it doesn't freaking matter. It doesn't matter even for like the Orange Bowl or any one of these like New Year's Six bowls because they're so far down. But the strength of the wins for Mississippi State, again, Texas A&M and NC State currently within the 25. Auburn, I would say, is a fringe team probably for this 25, another 4-loss team. Mm-hmm. But then the losses, LSU and Memphis being so damning. Strength of schedule for Mississippi State, number 14 in the country. I understand why Mississippi State landed at number 25, if for no other reason than to compare its profile to those teams in the 4 or 5 spots ahead of it where they have more wins.
Okay, well, keeping in mind that we are currently arguing or debating the number 25 team in the ranking, which I think gives the best indication of how crazy this week's rankings are. If we're going to rank a 4-loss team 25th, do we want to rank the one with 1 team or 1 win against a team that's still ranked, or the one team with 2 wins or another win? All right, Penn State 6-4 too. Penn State has a win over Wisconsin, which is very much comparable to Mississippi State's win over Texas A&M as far as where they both are in the rankings. Penn State also has a win over Auburn, but if you look at Penn State's losses, Iowa's ranked, Ohio State is in the top 4, Michigan you have at number 7 or 6, and then of course there's the Illinois loss, which is what's keeping Penn State out. But is there really a huge difference to you than Penn State losing a conference game against another Big Ten team compared to Mississippi State losing to an AAC team in Memphis? Like, I understand from a power rating wise, maybe Memphis is ranked higher than Illinois, but it's not like we can sit here and say for certain that Memphis is going to beat this Illinois team. I think
The Mississippi State Penn State debate broke with Auburn falling out and with Mississippi State beating Auburn, because now Penn State only has Wisconsin in terms of teams that the committee's really excited about. The 4-loss teams, I had a couple. I texted you. Oh, hold on. Sorry. We forgot to get angry. Tom, I am angry about Utah at 23.
I can't believe it. What a joke.
I can't believe it. All right, so I told you that I had about 8 teams that were all in that spot from like 21 to 25. And the only 4-loss teams that I thought were going to be in the mix were Penn State, Mississippi State, Purdue, and Auburn. Clearly, Auburn, Purdue, and Penn State all did not make the top 25, but I thought all of them had a decent argument. And to me, the Penn State versus Mississippi State argument comes down to 2 things. Number 1, Penn State has less wins against teams in the current top 25. And number 2 is you have to keep Mississippi State in there for another quality win for Alabama, because it's all about trying to find the quality wins for the teams at the top in 21 through 25. CFP Anon is back, baby. Logged on and ready to go. We are 12 Chan here.
Are you at all surprised that Clemson isn't ranked? Because if you're that desperate that you're putting in a 6-4 team because you just need to find somebody to fill out because you're contractually obligated to rank 25 teams, can't you just put a 7-3 Clemson team in there whose only losses have come to 3 teams that you've ranked? They lost to your number 1 team, Georgia. They lost to your number 20 team, NC State. And they lost to your number 22 team, Pitt. Now, they don't have a resume win to speak of, which is why they're not ranked, but still. I would rather have a 7-3 team without the super impressive win than a 6-4 team right now. And I understand that it's really not a big deal. It's just, for me, like, if you're 6-4, you're not one of the 25 best teams in the country. Not right now.
The 7-3 team without an impressive win you're talking about is Utah at number 23, and I'm mad about Utah at 23.
But that's like, if Utah can be ranked, why can't Clemson be ranked?
Clemson, who, by the way, is the best win, I think, for NC State as well, who is 7-3 and at number 20. Arkansas at number 21. You feel good about that?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I mean, they don't have 4 losses. So
Arkansas is 7-3 and its strength of schedule ranks number 2 in the country.
Yeah, I know.
If you go 7-3 against the second hardest schedule in the country, then
you could probably argue that the committee's giving other teams a little too much respect and they're not giving Arkansas enough.
Yeah.
But I think it's the manner in which, like, they got just completely crushed by Georgia that kind of probably tempers the way that they feel about them. But still, they beat Texas A&M by 10. That Texas win was super impressive at the time, but as it's gone on, it kind of doesn't mean a damn thing. But, you know, they lost. They got in that crazy shootout with Ole Miss, lost by a point. They played well against Auburn, lost by 2 scores. But so that's probably what it is. It's just 2 of the 3 losses have been by at least 2 scores.
So what do you mentioned earlier, the Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State. Do you see a path, and I'll try and talk my way around this, but do you see a path where 2 teams from the Big Ten East could make it into the college football playoff?
No, I think that died once they all had a loss. Like, if Michigan had avoided its loss earlier, if Michigan State, if there were 2 undefeated teams going into the stretch, then yes, there would have been the possibility, like, say Michigan's undefeated and they lose close to Ohio State, and then Ohio State wins the Big Ten, and then Michigan's sitting there at 11-1, and its only loss is a close loss to the number 2 or 3 team in the country. Then I could very easily see them getting the same kind of treatment Alabama got a few years ago when they didn't even win the division, and they got into the playoff as a number 4 seed. I could see that happening, but right now, Michigan State or Ohio State will have 2 losses come Saturday night. And then if Ohio State beats Michigan State, either it or Michigan will have 2 losses by the time their game is over. So that means that unless we're going to see a 2-loss team get in as an at-large, no. And I really don't think we're going to see a 2-loss team get in as an at-large. Same thing with Alabama.
Yeah, if Alabama loses to Georgia in the SEC championship game, even as it sits there at number 2, I do think that, so I guess they would be 11-2. I think 11-2 Alabama, 11-2 Alabama versus 13-0 Cincinnati. I think they take Cincinnati.
That's the only one I'm not 100% convinced.
11-2 Alabama against. What about 11-2 non-champion Alabama against
12-1 champion Oklahoma State?
12-1 Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State.
The only, I think here, okay, you know what I say? I don't think Alabama is, but there are 2 possibilities. I think Alabama could be a 2-loss non-SEC champ as long as he doesn't get blown out by Georgia in the title game. I love these hypotheticals, by the way. I could see a 2-loss Alabama getting chosen over both Cincinnati and possibly 11-1 Notre Dame, because they'll make the argument, well, hey, Notre Dame's not a conference champion either. So, but
what about 12-1 Wake Forest?
No, if you're an ace, if you are a Power 5 conference champion with 1 loss, I don't think even this committee, with as flawed as a lot of their thinking has been, I don't think they will turn down a 1-loss Power 5 champion for a 2-loss non-conference champion, no matter who it is. And if they do, then
that's it. We
honestly,
are opening this thing up.
This system is, I mean, I hate the system as it is. I've never made a secret of that. But if they do that, then I'm just, I will not be on the playoff recaps anymore. I will not talk about the playoff on this show ever again.
Do you want to hear something that is, it sounds horrible, but I think I agree with the gist of it?
Sure.
Quote from Gary Barra, the selection committee chair, athletic director at Iowa, currently on ESPN, as we come to you live on youtube.com/cover3. Many thanks to Coca for transcribing this. First part of the comment, which is my favorite. Set aside watching the games. Excuse me, sir. Do we not care about watching these games? I thought that you told us that all you did was watch the game. Anyway, Gary Barta, set aside watching the games, though that's certainly part of it. But statistically, in just about every category, offensively and defensively, Michigan comes out on top over Michigan State. Talking about the Michigan State Wolverines ahead of Michigan State, despite Michigan State winning the head-to-head. And you know what? I've crunched those numbers too. I agree with Gary Barta. Michigan, in so many metrics, comes out as the better team than Michigan State. But it is hilarious that the preface is, listen, don't watch the games. Just check out offensive and defensive statistics, and you can see the Wolverines are better, which means it is the other side of the argument that they've made for years, which is how we watch all the games. That is an anti-eye test argument from Gary Barta, the selection committee chair.
And that we watch all the games has always been crap. They've never watched all the games. These are 13 people who have jobs that aren't this. They've all got a lot more important things to be doing than watching all these games. They show up every week and they look at numbers on a screen. And then the numbers tell them who the better teams are. And then that's how they put the ranks together, which is what I've talked about from the beginning. They can rig this thing any damn way they want. They can make the numbers what they want them to be because it's just 13 people like, oh, well, this number's better than that number, so this team must be better than that team. That's all it is. That's why this whole thing is a farce, and it has been since the beginning.
Okay, so is the basketball selection committee a farce? Because I'm pretty sure that they are super numbers based, and we have great, like a 3 to 4 times sample size, I will admit. And we also have a field that is 68 instead of 4. But the way that
But there's another huge difference, though. It's not just the size. It's that there are automatic bids. half that field is an automatic bid. You win your
32.
conference, you're in. The other spots, the at-larges, that gets to be, I mean, then they can use the numbers that they want to, because they never put the second place team from those mid-majors in or those small conferences. It's always going to be the 5th place team in the Big Ten getting the shot over that. So it serves that same thing. But that's why I want, when they do expand this thing, I want every Power 5 champion in automatically. Every single one.
Yeah.
I want at least one group of 5 champion in. Hell, I would be, what are there, 10 conferences? I would go with all 10 conference champions get in and 2 at-larges. That's my ideal playoff. I think that is the most fair way to do it, but they won't do that, obviously.
They won't do that. But your beating of the drum of the automatic bids has been a pivot that I like. This is weird, Tom. I am a fan of like some of your opinions, but I heard that one and I was like, it's a good take. You know, like Tom and I have been working together for 11, 12 years. And I was like, hey, you know what? That's
finally
fine. Like you could just be grumpy, or you could carve out like a sensible position in what you believe to be the new future, and understanding that expansion is coming. You say, fine, expansion's cool, but make the conference championship races matter. Make this be something that you can go into it and say, we really do have a chance. If you are that, if you're Utah right now and there's an automatic bid for a Pac-12 team, then who cares if you don't have a single win against a team in the top 25, because all you're thinking about is getting to the Pac-12 championship, winning that Pac-12 championship, and making it to the college football playoff.
Mm-hmm. And I do think it's funny, going back to Barta's comments there, that like the one argument then everybody was, screaming against the Tide coming in about the playoff, and to begin with, when we were still in the BCS, was, well, every game matters. Now we're in the 8th year of the playoff, and even the committee is admitting the games don't matter.
Yeah, they said put watching the games aside. Listen, I understand, Gary, you're real busy. You got a lot going on, but man, you don't even have a coaching search to deal with right now. And for you to throw that little phrase out there, like, we're going to clip that and we are going to be talking about that for a long time. Put watching the games aside. SMH.
I mean, I agree that Michigan's better than Michigan State too.
Correct, which is why I said it's like, I agree with the sentiment. But
that's fine. Michigan State still beat them. That has to matter. And if Michigan State goes and beats Ohio State on Saturday, and then Michigan beats Ohio State and they put in Michigan over Michigan State when they both have the same wins, except the one beat the other one, that's just, again,
it's setting it up for the Notre Dame over Cincinnati for the final bit.
Mm-hmm.
We say offensively, defensively, strength of schedule, all the numbers that we looked at on our big dumb sheets said that Notre Dame was a better team than Cincinnati.
Yeah, fast forward, like, why did we choose Notre Dame over? Well, none of us watched that game. So that was, we put that game aside and we looked at the numbers on the computer.
Incredible.
Maybe that's what they're doing, just to give us something to talk about. Maybe that's the bone they're throwing. Gary Bart is like, I got to give the dogs some meat.
Any other thoughts from the 25? I think I detailed those teams that I feel like my snubs are Penn State, Purdue, Auburn, and I think that's it.
Yeah, and even those, I mean, they're snubs, but they're not like, I don't know. I mean,
listed a 4-loss, a 4-loss, and a 4-loss team.
At least they did the token thing of throwing Houston at 24. But that's clear. That still just gives you an idea of how little respect they have for that conference.
So I've been updating ever since the first release, I've been updating all these numbers. Houston's strength of schedule is dropping.
Yeah.
It's 125 right now.
Yeah.
And it's getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the other problem that Cincinnati faces too, is that over the last few years, the American has, without question, been the best group of 5 conference. That's not the case this year.
Yeah.
Cincinnati's great. The rest of that conference has been pretty mediocre. And I think the Mountain West, honestly, has more good teams than the American does this season.
San Diego State at 9-1 has a strength of schedule 7 spots higher than where Houston is. Also at 9. Houston's also at 9-1. Yeah, at this point. Yep. San Diego State picking up. San Diego State also has the Utah win, which helps it with a win against a top 25 team according to the selection committee. something that Utah cannot boast.
Which maybe that's another point in Notre Dame's cap, because the difference between Cincinnati and Houston for the most part is obviously Cincinnati's undefeated, but they have that one win over Notre Dame, which separates them from 19 places, whereas San Diego State's got a win over Utah, which gets it up to 19 instead of 24, where Houston is. So when you look at the gap between Cincinnati and San Diego, that kind of gives you an idea of what the committee thinks of Notre Dame, which will be part of the reason why they choose Notre Dame over Cincinnati if it comes down to it.
So the big takeaways.
Games aside.
Big takeaways are: number one, put watching the games aside. Number two, we're hating the Big 12. And number three, prepare yourself for Notre Dame over Cincinnati.
Let's make a deal right here, right now, you and me.
Okay.
Saturday, let's not watch a single game. And then we'll just come on the reaction pod and break them all down.
No deal.
Games aside. Final score aside, I think that whoever Alabama played today is a better team than they are.
I've seen what happens to analysts who don't watch games. I've seen them step out on that tightrope, and it doesn't go well for them. And I enjoy my job, and I take great pride in the work that we do here on the Cover 3 podcast. Couldn't be me. Could not be me.
But is there not a part of you that would be interested to see how a reaction pod would go if we didn't watch a single minute?
Well, one thing I do like about the reaction pod is our honesty. You know, like when we'll say, "Oh, I didn't see much of that game. You know, did you?" Or like, "Oh, like I saw this. What happened?" And I think that when we gather together, it is impossible for us to have awesome expert I watched this opinions on, you know, we're going to end up discussing 20 to 30 games in the process of a reaction pod. Like there's no way you could actually watch all of that. I mean, I've seen like, I don't know why, but like Phil Steele, I don't even think he does it anymore, but back in the day,
8 screens or whatever.
Yeah. He used to always do a shot. It's like, 12 o'clock window winding down. Like I can't do that. I need to have my like alpha, beta, gamma. Like I need to have my tiers along the way, not to mention our own professional responsibilities with live blogging and the like.
Well, see what's happened. Like, yeah, when I'm live blogging a game, like I have other games on, but the live blogging is taking all the attention from everything. But I will say the one bonus of there being a billion TV timeouts per quarter now is that when you do have multiple games going, you've always generally got a game playing at some point. So when they all go to commercial, you just look at the other one, and that's when you watch.
Yeah.
And then you come back.
Yep, 100%. What'd you think about the 1-1 draw?
I didn't watch it.
Is that a Gary Barta joke?
No, I didn't watch. I was just, I mean, U.S. is already in, so it wasn't really that big of a deal to me. But I don't know. How'd Jamaica look? Did Leon Bailey play?
For
Jamaica. I know Mikel Antonio played.
And had a banger.
Yeah, well, he's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the nastiest West Ham players. But
I just want to say I discovered Michael Antonio because I was doing a FIFA career a couple years ago, and I signed him from like Bordeaux in France, and just I had him in my team in the championship. He led us to the Premier League, so I knew before anybody else did that Michael Antonio was going to be a stud.
As a good Serie A fan, I was excited to see Busio get the start and play the full 90. But you know, I didn't listen to Kegalazzo for more. The Kegalazzo podcast, Jimmy Conrad and Heath Pierce, I'm sure doing an instant reaction right now where they are, you know, wringing their hands at some of the listless performance down the stretch. Tim Weah had an awesome goal early. Then Mikel Antonio had the answer. And then it was just like a bunch of like bad mistakes by Anthony Robinson, you know, a couple of like, I don't know, just kind of yucky, uninspiring kind of efforts down the stretch, especially in the defense and the midfield. A lot of brain farts out there. Not great, but it's a point on the road. So whatever.
Letdown game after Mexico. You know it's coming. But I will say the one nice thing about the state of the USMNT right now is they've actually reached a point of competency where I don't feel like I have to watch every single match because it's like, they'll be fine. They're going to make it this time. Whereas like last time when the World Cup came, it's like, oh God, they might not make it.
It's like they took off Ricardo Pepi for Areola. Like there was a bunch of like 75th minute moves where I was like, oh, okay, y'all are good with the draw. That's fine. You both scored earlier. He is Tom Fernelli. Here's the deal. We are going to be back with you on Wednesday. We're going to be dipping into that big old bag of mail, as well as hitting some of the headlines from the coaching carousel, updating our win totals and our season-long projections, maybe even our fantasy teams from our Cover 3 draft, as well as more takeaways from these rankings from Danny Cannell, and Bud Elliott. You can follow him on Twitter at Tom Fernelli. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.